Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Po, and today I'm doing a review of Golem Girl by Riva Lehrer. This is such a great memoir. It is about a queer Jewish artist growing up in the 1960s in the US with spina bifida, and it is just so full of humor and emotion, and I absolutely loved it. So I want to tell you all about it and why I think you should pick it up. Content warnings are in the description box below. The first aspect of this book that made it just so worth picking up is the writing. I think that this is written incredibly well. Lehrer does such an amazing job of describing her experiences in life in a way that really draws you in. It is such vivid writing. There's also a lot of humor involved, even when situations are rather difficult or intense. And a lot of what she has been through is kind of difficult and intense. But there's such a sense of amusement and humor and laughing at the dark side of life in her writing that I think makes it just so readable. So I wanted to give you an example of her writing. So I'm going to read a quote from her childhood when she was in the hospital. "Children make friends at warp speed in the hospital. New pals come and go with no explanation. Friendships are as brief and intense as an episode of Star Trek. Any minute, somebody might beam down and never be seen again. We'd cling to each other as best we could and ignore the vast blackness outside the door." The next thing I loved about this book was how full of photos and paintings this book was. So I'm going to insert a bunch of images and you can see some idea of what was included. There are a lot of photos that give you real insight into what her life was like. Photos of her childhood or her family, photos of her lovers, photos of her at different points in her life. There's also so many paintings in here because she is an artist, and so you see a lot of her different work and you see the subjects that she tackles and you see what she's talking about when she talks about her growth as an artist and what sort of subjects she works with. It's just so vivid and really brings to life what she is talking about, and it makes so much sense. So even if you're somebody who likes to listen to audiobooks, I definitely recommend also picking up the physical copy so that you can look at all of these beautiful photos and images that are inserted. Now I want to talk about some of the content of this book that I thought really made it special. So the first is Lehrer talking about her experiences growing up with spina bifida. So she was born in the 1950s, and really just a few years before she was born, somebody who had spina bifida had a very low chance of survival. They tried some new techniques, some new surgeries that really improved that, but she was one of the first kids to be born with spina bifida that they really had those techniques for. And spina bifida is something that kids can be born with, and it is very life-threatening, and even in her case where she was able to survive past childhood, nobody really knew, would she have a long lifespan and what would her quality of life be? So it was really interesting to hear her talk about the history of spina bifida, the history of the treatment, and then everything that she went through. Because this is something that really constantly affects her health, it is very much throughout the memoir because she's very frequently in and out of hospitals, often has to have surgeries, often gets sick and has to have life-saving surgeries throughout her life, things that interrupt everything else that she's doing. So spina bifida is a huge part of her life, but it also isn't something that is the only thing that she has, if that makes sense. So there's a lot of other things in this memoir, but this is a key part of her experience. And I really also liked how this tied in with this idea of the title, Golem Girl, where she feels like a lot of the time people dehumanize her, and they don't see her as somebody who is like everybody else and who has dreams and who can be a contributing member of society, all of these sorts of things. They see her almost as this monster. And so her kind of processing the way that disability is seen, and especially the way that she had to struggle to get access and support for things, it's just really fascinating. And I loved that aspect of this memoir. Another really strong part of this story is the story not just of Lara herself, but the story of her family and her community. So her family plays a very large role in her life, and especially in her childhood. Her mother was a huge factor in everything that she did. Her mother was somebody who constantly advocated for healthcare for her. Her mother is the reason that they went ahead and did these surgeries. Her mother was this huge, huge factor in her life, and it's very interesting as she grows up into teenagehood, watching that relationship with her mother change as Lara struggles for independence and her mother struggles to keep her safe, while also her mother was dealing with her own disabilities, both physical and mental. And it's really heartbreaking just seeing the story of her mother, which is almost as key to this memoir as Lara's experiences herself. So that was really, really powerful. The story of the communities that Lara is part of is also such a huge part of this book. So there's the Jewish community that she grows up in, her family and the other members of the community, the way that they have different approaches to things, and even, you know, just the process of how you grieve is really fascinating in that community. There's the community of other disabled people. So when she's a kid and she's going to a school for disabled kids, that community that she builds there. But then as she grows into an adult, she sort of loses that community only to regain it later on. And the way that she interacts with other kids with disabilities, the way they see each other, and the way the outside world sees them. And lastly, the artist community. So as an adult, when she is an artist, that artist community and what they're working towards and what they're saying with their art and all of the things that they're doing is really fascinating. And there's so much in this story that is about that connection, about that support for each other through community. Another big topic that this book tackles is her queer coming of age story. So a lot of the first half of this book is really dedicated to those family dynamics and interacting with her mother and growing up with spina bifida. But a lot of the second half of this book is her queer coming of age story, which I always really enjoy. I like coming of age stories, and I like seeing somebody discover their sexuality. And what I think is really powerful about this story is that in many ways, Lara is desexualized by society because she has disability. So that intersectionality between her coming of age and coming into her queerness, while also dealing with a society that doesn't even think she should have sexual desires, that sort of rejects the idea that she could be a sexual person, and the rebellion that she has and the complete love of sex and sexuality that she feels, and the way that she expresses that through being in relationships but also through her artwork is really fascinating. So that conflict between the way that society views her and the way that she views herself, and also a lot of the ways that the view of society affects her life pretty deeply is really powerful in this. So I loved that part of this. And the last aspect that I wanted to talk about was her journey into disability activism, which was such a powerful story. So Lara is somebody who grew up with disability, but also internalized a lot of the ableism of people around her. And only later in life, as an older adult, did she come into the realization that that is completely wrong, and that actually disabled bodies are just as beautiful and just as worthwhile as everybody else. And I thought it was just so moving to watch that journey and to see how she found community within the disabled artist community and used her art to speak up and to value and to show the worth of disabled bodies. It was so moving. Overall, I think that Golem Girl is just such a fantastic memoir. I could not put this down. I was so engaged throughout the entire story. I love Lara's way of writing, the way that she talks about all of these experiences that she went through, the way that she shows how her artwork progressed. It's all fantastic. This is also something where, even though I think that her writing style is very engaging and often humorous, there's a lot of heavy content in this. So I do recommend that you check out the content warnings below. There's quite a few things in here that are a little bit hard to handle, and especially if you have any issues around reading about medical procedures, and often medical procedures that are not good, this can be a tough read. So be aware of that. But I think that it was just really a wonderful memoir. And if you like anything to do with art, with disability, with history, with activism, and with memoir, you really should pick this up. It is fantastic. If you guys have read this memoir, or if you're interested, if you have any thoughts, if you have any recommendations for me for other memoirs that sound like this, anything at all, just leave me a comment down below.